Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Auditing EUC webinar. Let's wait for a couple of minutes more for the other participants to join. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Before we begin with the webinar, let me take you through a brief introduction of Wipro. My name is Anita Jalishya, and I'm a manager in internal audit here at Wipro India. Now, to introduce Wipro, we are a management consulting based in Mumbai, and we've been in the business for about 9 years plus. And we have a team of about 50 members, which is spread across various cities in India. And we also have an associate firm representation across 20 plus cities. Our main business verticals are risk advisory, technology, recruitment, and training. Now, as part of risk advisory, we have GDPR compliances. We also do SSA reviews, and also various ERM and risk assessments. As part of our technology, we provide through our technology partners the internal audit software, risk management software, legal compliance, and insider trading. And recently in-house, we have a vendor risk management software or a third-party risk management software. And in terms of the training, so we conduct regular classroom or web-based trainings on various risk and compliance related topics. Just a few minutes for the webinar as to how it will go today. Any participants are unable to see the screen or they're not able to hear what is being said, I would request you to please try and re-log in and see if the problem still persists. And if it does so, please just drop us a comment and we'll definitely check into it and get back to you. And if you do have any questions regarding what is being explained during the webinar, I would request you to please put in your questions in the chat or question box. And towards the end of the webinar, maybe about 10 minutes before the end, we can take the question answer. Later, who will be taking you through the Auditing EUC presentation.
Great. Thank you, Anita. A very good morning to everybody. Yes. I'm just gonna do this. Perfect. So a very good morning to everybody. Just give me a moment while I put this on. Yep, there you go. Okay. So very good morning. Anita, thanks so much for that introduction. And as Anita mentioned, considering the time and the large audience we are talking to today, we kind of kept the question and answers at the end of the session. So in between, if you have anything, you can make a note of it. Just start typing on your questions. We will certainly take as much as possible at the end of it. But you can also connect to us offline after this presentation. If you have anything specific that you want to discuss with us, we'll be very happy to help you. So what we are doing today, the topic is auditing EUCA, end user computing applications. We had done a webinar earlier, which was more on the introduction of EUCs, where we covered a lot of basics of EUCs and we did a lot of case studies. But I understand the audience are certainly different. So I'll give you a very quick introduction about myself, and then I'll tell you what is it that we are going to cover as an agenda for today. So my name is Nivedita Hampiholi. I've been with Risk Pro for about over a year and plus now. My experience, I come from 14 years of experience in working in risk management and internal audit area. 14 years, various organizations. I've worked for SOX, internal controls, and that's where my expertise lies with. I have also done EUC audits, specific EUC audits, so that's also something I bring to the table today when I'm talking about how do we audit end user computing applications. So a very quick view of what is it that we are trying to achieve today is we will understand what is an EUC, a very quick overview of like a definition, a very quick understanding. What are the types of EUCs? Why do we use them? And some of the risks, example risks in EUC. What are the key regulations? So EUC risk is certainly covered in some of the key regulations. What are those regulations? How do we audit EUCs? And we will try and touch upon at a very high level on the EUC governance. We may not have time to discuss in detail about this, but we can certainly, you can register for the next webinar when we are going to do it. But we will at a very high level touch upon the governance part of it. Before we start, let's go and see. So what is an EUC? So before I give you a definition, I mean, there might be like hundreds of definitions that is there around the EUC, but to understand that, we need to know what EUC is not. So So we all deal with spreadsheets, tools, applications, day in and day out in our regular work life, right? So we work on tools, we work on applications, ERP, spreadsheets, anything. So there is a spreadsheet which has a basic work that it does. It could be a to-do or a task checklist versus a proper designed, customized ERP. Now, EUC is actually something that lies between these two. So it is not something like a very simple spreadsheet, also not very complex and controlled as an ERP. So there is something that is lying between these two. So that is what is an EUC. Now, in terms of definition, sorry for that. So AUC is a system basically designed for non-programmers, right? So you have a technology concept, but what we normally try to do is create something in between that help us ease our work, save a lot of time, and reduce the kind of manual tasks that we do. So you basically put in formulas, you put in your codes. So you are actually using spreadsheets or databases or queries to basically ease your work. The manual task converted into a semi-automated task. And that is where the EUC come into picture. So if you see this, I'm just going to put this so we can view this properly. So end user computing are computing solutions and applications created and maintained by business units. Now, I know in the audience, we may have people who are from auditing backgrounds, but also from the business units backgrounds. So for business units, I can probably tell you that we will be talking about the best practices that you can put in place when you build an EUC. And from an auditing background, certainly what do you need to look for when you're auditing EUCs? So you need to remember this point very well, that it is maintained and owned by the business units so that it is embedded within the business unit processes. Now, the types of EUCs, it can be anything. You could have scripts written, queries, spreadsheets. It could be anything in terms of, but pretty large EUCs, when I talk about it, it's mostly in the form of spreadsheets. So give me a moment. Yep. So why do we use them? Very natural reasons, very obvious reasons. Now, it certainly reduces cost because you might end up shelling a lot of money if you want to buy tools and softwares that needs to automate your business. It involves a lot of cost and money. So to reduce that cost, you go ahead and create EUCs. Increase efficiency and less effort. So to give you an example, you are working on a data which goes into rows and columns, like thousands of rows and columns, right? So imagine if you want to update, just giving an example, say a price schedule. So you have the items listed, you want to update a price schedule. How do you really go ahead and do it manually for every single line item? It's very difficult, right? So what you do is a copy and a simple copy paste or a formula helps you kind of update it, like, at the click of your button. So that's how you improve your efficiency. It's very less effort when you're doing repetitive tasks. The less turnaround time to make a change. Now, Excel is very appealing. It's very attractive because you can play around the data at your hands, right? So you can do any kind of analysis, comparisons. You cut, edit, copy, paste. You basically can put it in any kind of a presentation. So you can literally play around with the data. So the turnaround time to perform any kind of these actions is very quick, and you get to see the results in the form of reports. So for example, if you're into any kind of a finance function, most of your financial reporting, your regulatory reporting is in the form of EUCs. If you're in a banking industry, if you are preparing your KPI, so anything you talk about comes in a form of Excel format, and The background of that is nothing but, the formulas that you build behind that. So that is where EUC saves a lot of time, allowing users to directly manage, control, manipulate data and speed. We kind of touched upon this. The enabling businesses to quickly deploy solutions. So to give a very quick example here, so imagine if you're in, again, a banking or an industry or a stock market or an insurance industry where you're dealing with changes that happens on a regular basis. It could be the forex rate, it could be the trade prices. So you are working in an environment where you'll have to modify the data every day. So you can actually build an EUC where it kind of takes up the data from the market. You link it to any kind of a tool, Bloomberg kind of a tool, and it takes the data, real-time basis. So you can quickly deploy to any kind of changing market or economic decisions and to evolving regulations as well. In terms of EUCs, when we talk about our best friend who makes our job easier, now the EUCs can also be your worst enemy. Now, why do we say that when it saves so much of time, when it is so very cost effective? Why do we say it is an enemy? So you see the fine balancing act that a person is doing here. Why does that happen? Is because EUCs are most of the time not developed by people with enough training. So today, if I have to ask the audience and say, if you're an Excel expert, are you certified in Excel? We hardly see about 80-90% of them saying, oh no, I'm not trained in Excel. But you still go ahead and see people creating spreadsheets, tools, formulas, putting in all the codes and doing the work around the end user computing applications. They're not certified. They might come with little training, but they are called near experts. So they might be very good in Excel, but that doesn't certify you to do something. But you still go ahead and develop EUCs. So that is where the risk lies. So when we talk about risk, we will certainly talk a little more in detail in our next slide. So we're just highlighting what are the problems that we face in EUCs here. Hidden somewhere between your automated IT environment and manual task. When I talk about IT, if any of you and most of you are aware, we do have audits where we test the IT general controls. We also have operational audits to conduct, but EUCs sit in between that. It doesn't fall under your IT umbrella. It doesn't fall under your business processes. So we are looking at something which is hidden. If I don't ask the question, I might not even know if you're using any kind of such tools, if you're using any end user computing tools. So it is somewhere hidden. Similarly, the risk is hidden. So that is one of the reason why when probably a risk management or an internal audit people or an external audit come to conduct audits, we may have not covered this in our annual audit plan. Either you have not covered it as a part of your regular audits. It could be one of the items you can test, or as an overall plan where you probably do it as a yearly review where you actually look at the kind of EUCs you use in the organization. What are the mitigating controls? So that is somewhere hidden in the entire organizational plan of audit. Non-controlled, highly non-controlled. I would kind of emphasize on this point because there is no way you can control the way it is created. Every person, if you're a team of 50 member, I think about 10 or 15 or 20 people might want to just go ahead and create just put a VLOOKUP formula, just go and put a formula somewhere here and there and say, I want to do this way. So it's very uncontrolled environment. So what does that do? Is it increases a lot of risk which your business is exposed to. You won't believe we are actually going to talk about some of the horror stories that we call as. If you look at this, I'm not going to read through everything in considering the time. But if you look at this, I'm talking about a Barclays. So you're really looking at big organizations. I'm not even talking about a startup or a 50-member or a 100-member organization. So if you look at this, companies like Barclays, Fidelity, JP Morgan, they have incurred losses. And this is with simple errors, simple mistakes of not having enough controls around your end user computing applications. Simple, if you look at the middle, the center slide, the box which says a cut and paste error in a spreadsheet, it cost TransAlta 24 million. So I'm not even talking about like in terms of single digits here, we're talking in millions. So it was a simple cut and paste error. We spoke about the financial errors here, the financial losses. But if you look at this, the last one where we talk about the MI5, so basically this is a reputational risk we are talking about, right? So in 2010, the British intelligence agency, where they were supposed to, they normally bug phones when they are spying industry, right? But they ended up bugging more than 1,000 wrong phone numbers. And this was due to an Excel error. So this is where the reputation is at stake. So it is not only your financial risk, but also reputation that is at stake. So we actually call this as a horror story because a very simple error can put you at a greater risk in the market, right? So why is it so important? You will be surprised to look at the data that this is like just a glimpse of data that I collected. So if you read through this, it says 90% of the spreadsheets we use, that is over 150 rows, it contains errors. Show me a spreadsheet which doesn't have more than 150 rows, right? So on a daily basis, I don't know how many rows and columns we are dealing with. Multiple tabs, multiple rows, multiple columns. Imagine if it's 90% of them contain errors. That's quite a big number. Code inspection experiments also shows that even experienced users have a hard time finding errors. So even if you're an experienced user, if you ask me to come and look at a particular spreadsheet today and find errors, we may not be able to do it. I may not be able to find 100% errors in that spreadsheet and say, hey, this is not working fine. That's highly impossible. 94% of the spreadsheets have errors, and that the average cell errors is 5.2%. So at 94% itself is a big number, but if you look at the average cell error rates, so your rows into your columns will give you like, I don't know, millions of cells that you're working. So you're looking at 5% two cell error rates. It's an average cell error rate. 88% of all the spreadsheets have errors in them, right? And now this is where we are coming at. Well, 50% of spreadsheets are used by large companies. They have material defects. So if you look at the studies that we have taken here, I mean, it's like we're staring at real big risk in the market, right? You look at the numbers and you'll be like, you want to go back and immediately look at the spreadsheets that you're using and say, hey, is my spreadsheet sufficiently controlled? Have I mitigated all the risk? So when we talk about risk, so sorry, what are the kind of risks that we are talking about? So we kind of touched upon some of them. Financial misstatement. Your financial risk is certainly involved. We spoke about the $1 million that is, getting lost. Regulatory risk. We will cover a slide where we also talk about certain regulations where EUC is covered. So if you're not mitigating it, then you certainly are exposed to regulatory risk. Operational risk for sure, because it affects your regular operations, your business functions. Data governance, a very high risk given the amount, the emphasis that is on the data protection nowadays with the GDPR and everything coming in. Data governance is a very high risk. Process execution, certainly there. Internal fraud risk, anybody can create an EUC if they really want to intentionally commit a fraud and probably make some millions in the company. So EUC is basically everywhere, right? It touches upon all the kind of risks in your organization. How do we regulate it? Fortunately, we do have some of the key regulations that refers to how do we control on the EUCs. So we have Sarbanes-Oxley, Dodd-Frank. We also have the Office of the Controller, where we talk about the model outputs deriving from spreadsheets. And we also have Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, where they clearly say that banks relying on spreadsheet should have effective mitigants and controls in place. I'm not going to go into very detail of this. You can certainly get in touch with us offline. I can give you more information on this. Our focus is today on how do we audit EUC, so I'm quickly going to run through that. How do we do this? So you can actually get a risk-based methodology where you basically go and identify the critical EUCs. The next step is to define their risk profile, and then you test the existing controls. A comparison with the existing controls and the required controls will give you the control deficiencies. So you basically recommend, put in your report and tell the management that, hey, go ahead and please rectify these errors, right? So how do we do that? In order to identify critical ones, you need to have an inventory first of all. So an inventory is basically something that captures every end user computing applications you use. Critical, non-critical, material, non-material, anything that you're using, make an inventory. Ideally, if you just look at the inventory as an auditor, how do you get a comfort that it is 100%? It may not be. So you might use techniques like your walkthroughs. You can talk to your business owners. You can do a survey. You can look at their database. So you might have to use multiple methodologies and techniques to identify and arrive at the 100% inventory of the end user computing applications. Once you have this, you can go ahead and define the risk profile. Now, let me just take you to the complexity of this. Complexity, so if you're looking at a spreadsheet, it could depend on the size of the application, the type of formulas that is used. There's too much complicated, it's just not a simple plus or minus formula, but too many complicated formulas. The use of scripts, what is it that they are using? The external links, very important, because one of the key things that we use spreadsheets is to probably upload or download information from an external websites. So you might want to check at the external links. Logical complexity. So when you look at these factors, you might be able to define how complex is your EUC. 50%, 60%. So once you decide it's a highly complex EUC, you might want to go ahead and test it. Materiality. Immaterial, something that doesn't affect your business decisions. It doesn't have any long-term impact. You can just keep that away. You can ignore it. It should be a part of your inventory, but you can ignore it. Material. And a simple error in the preparation of this file can result in significant loss. So you're bringing the materiality aspect. So to go back to the horror stories that we saw, Fidelity, JP Morgan, if this is actually resulting in a significant loss, then you might want to include this in your critical EUCs. Contains sensitive information. There is possibility that someone can exploit it. We spoke about the internal fraud risk. So there is a possibility that someone can make use of this information, then it is critical. Material, sorry. Critical, similar to materiality, but it also leads to breach of legislation or a regulation. So we spoke about the Sarbanes-Oxley, Basel Committee, the regulations around this. So if at all, for example, if you're using it for any kind of reporting, if an error is resulting in the breach of any regulation, then that is a critical EUC for you. So we have identified an inventory. We have identified the critical EUCs. Now what do we do now is go and test this. So the very key aspect of any testing that you perform has to be around the policies and standards. So your design has to be adequately put in place. So any organization, any business unit that is being audited, have you defined a policy? Do you have a policy that says, okay, how do you define the criticality aspect? How do you define the procedure around the controls of the end user computing applications? Do you have a policy first? That is something that you have to put in place. Access controls. When we talk about access controls, someone who's creating an EUC, should probably have that access restricted. Like say, if you're a team of 10 member, you might have to go back and decide who should have access to it. Will all the 10 people have access to it? If not, if they don't need it, then you might not actually give access to them. So you'll have to look at the access controls. Change controls. End user computings are more dynamic in nature. Today, there is some change in the market or in the way you change the codes or formulas or anything about the end user computing applications. Are you making a note of those change? Why are you changing it? Are you documenting it? So the change controls are very important. Who's changing it is also something you might have to keep an eye on. Version controls, to make sure you're using the right versions. Assume, I'm going to actually do a very quick practical exercise on this, but assume if you're using an outdated EUC, then your results is also going to be incorrect. So version controls is very important. Development controls, testing, approval of that. So for example, if you're actually developing a critical, are you doing enough testing of that? So you can't just create today and start using it into your production environment. Just like any other application that goes through a proper SDLC, it may not be that longer and serious, but you will still have to test it to see whether it's generating accurate results. So you will have to test and then put it into a production environment. Documentation. Very important. Are you putting a procedure in place that says what is it supposed to do? How is it designed? And is it actually performing giving you the results why it is designed for? This also ensures that the person who's created, if they're no more with the organization, then the other people can actually read through and take over the EUCs in a proper manner. Input controls, output controls. I'm going to kind of club both and talk about this. To give you an example, if you are kind of uploading a data into any other tools, how do you ensure that you're uploading a spreadsheet with 2000 rows, all the 2000 rows have been uploaded onto a tool or a software that you want to use? There has to be sufficient check to make sure everything has been uploaded. Similarly, for output controls, how do you make sure there is balancing, that everything has been accounted for? Everything has been either uploaded or downloaded and your data is 100% accurate. So you talk about the accuracy, you're talking about the completeness. So you will have to make sure, especially when you're using this as an input or an output tool, you have to make sure this is in place. Segregation of duties. Who should use it? Who's approving it? Basically, as we spoke about, so we are focusing on the critical and material ones. So there has to be a business owner associated with that. Is someone approving it? Is someone just going ahead creating and start using it like here and there? But no, it has to be a properly approved end user computing application. How do you segregate the roles and responsibilities? So you will have to define that appropriately. Backup and archival. It should kind of reside, if it's a critical EUC, it should kind of reside on a secured server, and you will have to take backup on a regular basis, because if you lose it once, there are possibilities you will also lose your data. So you can just archive the prior versions and always use the correct version. So what we can do is, in the next 5 minutes, I'm actually going to take you very quickly to, so let's look at this file. Just going to take 5 minutes here. So what I've done is I've actually taken the income tax file, which is certainly categorized as one of the critical EUCs, right? You do this every year. You download spreadsheets and you put all your income tax figures and then you upload onto the income tax government website. So if you look at this file, if you see there are formulas hidden here, right? Let's say I'm not going to edit here. I'm just going to show you how the formulas are derived at, right? So if you look at all this in this particular spreadsheet, I can basically go and edit. If I say enable editing, I can go ahead and edit any formulas here. Highly unprotected, I can go here, type anything. I can just show you that here. Let's say if enable editing. So in this particular spreadsheet, I can go ahead and just type anything anywhere it's not protected. Let's just take this. So if you see here, yep, there you go. So this is that's gonna take time. Sorry for that. Yeah. So if you see, I can go ahead and just put anything here. I can change the formulas. I can change the figures. I can change my birth date. So birth date, yes, you will have to key in all this. So you'll have to fill in the orange cells, but I can actually go ahead and modify the formulas here. It is so simple for me to just modify the formulas. So for me, this is not a protected spreadsheet, but what are the compensating controls that I can put in place for this is when I upload it onto the website, there is certain validation controls to make sure I'm not uploading wrong data. So if I'm a female and somewhere I mention my PAN number or incorrectly or my gender incorrectly, the income tax website should stop me from doing it. But for me, this is not a very good example because I can just play around with this data and do anything with this. Versus a spreadsheet, which is more controlled. So this is the same example of another income tax file. If you look at this, I can just go here. It doesn't allow me to do this. It clearly says you need a password. So password protection is one of the controls that you can put to protect your spreadsheets. So if you look at this, it doesn't give me an option to modify the formulas other than just input my salary figures, my savings, specifically which is related to the investment. I just have to put it and it will automatically calculate everything. I can't even modify formulas in this. So this is more an example of a protected web spreadsheet. We do have a time constraint, but otherwise, if you actually take an example like this and start playing around, there are too many things that you can do to identify how protected and how well controlled is your spreadsheet. So this is a clear example of what it should be and what it should not be. So I just have to key in, like say, it only allows me to key in the figures. It takes everything automatically, right? So I've started putting this from July. Assume my salary has changed like from June, then it automatically takes that value here. So I can only key in my salary figures here. So similarly, if I try to modify it doesn't even give me an option to look at the formulas, but I can actually show you. If you see this, when you go down, nowhere it gives me an option to modify the formulas here. So if you see, nowhere it is showing me what is the formula hidden behind this. It's highly protected. So nowhere. If you see, I've been trying to and see wherever if it can show the formulas, but no. If you see even the total in hand, everything, it's basically taking the value from what I update here, and it is not even showing me that it is actually a sum formula. It is a different kind of a formula used here. So this is a very highly protected spreadsheet. So if we go back, what are the kind of errors that we normally see in a spreadsheet? Let's just go back to this and present it. So if you see this, I'm actually going to the presenting screen. So these are some of kind of the errors that we normally see in a spreadsheet. There we go. So let's divide it between two. One is your design deficiency and the other one is the operating effectiveness. So when we looked at the various kind of errors and controls that we need to test, not having a policy at all in your organization is a major design deficiency. You don't even have an inventory, I'm sorry to say, then it's a very highly uncontrolled, exposed environment. Governance aspect, lack of governance is a design deficiency. You're not even complying to regulations. So these are like a very key risk. You might want to go back and immediately put a control in place if you're a business owner. But if you're an auditor, then these are the very key things. You might want to go back and say, hey, it's high time you look into the controls, mitigating controls to be put in place. Operating deficiencies, certainly incomplete inventory. You have an inventory, but it's incomplete. You don't capture everything in that. Insufficient controls. You may have put certain controls in place, but it's not actually meeting the objectives. Incomplete documentation, you can't just go ahead and define, I'm using this EUC for so and so function and stop it. No, you will have to define what is it supposed to do, how is it used, where is it used, who are the people using it. So a complete comprehensive documentation that talks about the detailed procedures. Inadequate governance from senior management. Ideally, every end user computing tools or spreadsheet has to be owned by somebody. So it should always have a business owner and preferably from the senior management. So that way you ensure there is adequate governance around it. This is just an example of what I've given, but ideally if you start digging into this topic, we might talk for hours and hours, but these are some of the kind of deficiencies that you find in any kind of a EUC. I'm not going to read through every question. I'm just going to slide through this and say what are the kind of questions you ask when you go for auditing it. If it's a governance control, then who's, kind of, is there a policy that is governing the EUCs, up-to-date inventory, data integrity, is it protected, stored in a proper place? It's not like on an individual's laptop, you can't have that. Even if you have it on a common drive for a team, then is the backup there on the server. So you need to make sure that is there. Spreadsheets are locked and protected. This is very important for a critical spreadsheets. Nobody can edit anything. Logic controls. Has it been reviewed? Someone other than the author. So I create it. Ideally, before you put into production, someone should have reviewed it and approved it. Are there detective controls? Now, when you actually create an EUC, how do you ensure as a business owner that there are controls to find errors? So for example, it could be validation controls. It could be formatting errors. So like, for example, if you do an incorrect VLOOKUP, it immediately shows up NA with all the hash signs and all that, right? So if you have a number format, you can't go ahead and put a text in a number format. So these are some of the kind of errors like a detective controls that you can have in place. So have you put those detective controls in place? Algorithms for complex spreadsheet, you might have to just go back and see, to review those algorithms and make sure you are coding in everything accurately and someone is actually reviewing it. On a regular basis is what is advised, at least a semi-annual basis. You should have tested your EUCs at least twice in a year. Input control, we just spoke about this. Is there an audit trail, validation checks? You will have to make sure the data is properly reconciled. So if you're taking a data from an external resource, are you ensuring that the data that you say, if you take a data, say 100 rupees, is 100 rupees is what is reflecting on your spreadsheet. Ideally, you can't do this one-on-one every cell. So many people, what they do is they put kind of a reconciliation formulas at the end of the spreadsheet to make sure it throws an error whenever there's a upload or download errors. So that can be done. Access controls. This is like a very basic kind of questions that I can put in place, but there are many that you can ask. But overall, it should be to check, who has the password. If it's password protected, who has the password? Well, appropriate users, disauthorized people use the EUCs, and it's not open to everybody to use it. How periodically do you review access rights? So we normally cover this in our SOC 2 testing, that a periodic review of access is important. We cover this for IT environment, but we don't cover it for EUC. So it's very important to even do it for a critical EUCs. Network sharing, permissions, what is the control you have in place for data transfer mechanism. So if you're sending any data to a third party, you might be sending left and right emails to people, including sensitive data that goes out to people. Do you have controls, enough controls to make sure that the data is not compromised? Confidentiality. Archival, we just spoke about this. So even in case of a BCP scenario, is this available for you to use? Archives granted only to authorized people. Dissemination controls, is it shared outside the BU, which should not be the case ideally, but if there is a possibility, how are you controlling it? Controls are in place for EUCAs that needs to be shared. This is again coming to the protection aspect. Encryption of cells, hidden sheets and hidden cells pose a bigger risk for you. So for example, a lot of times in one of the horror stories, if you're sharing a client information, a client report, there are possibilities you have a hidden sheet where you do a lot of working, the formulas and everything. When you're sharing it, make sure all the sheets, you verify all the sheets and make sure nothing is hidden, not, the cells or the sheets or tabs, nothing is hidden. So that's very important. Segregation of duties, so we kind of covered this also. Is there adequate segregation of duties in terms of roles, authorities, who is the owner, is there an ownership defined? Is there segregation of duties over changes and use of EUC? So someone has to make sure that changes are appropriately authorized, approved, you use the correct version. Does the person who performs the controls over input have the capacity to make changes? Ideally, in a very controlled environment, like how we have a business function and a reconciliation function sitting with different teams, you should also have that segregation of duties defined in terms of usage of EUCs. Is there a process for which one person has complete control over beginning to end? This is what I was talking about. So imagine if the same person is doing end-to-end cycle, the possibility of making mistakes are high. So if wherever possible, you might want to break that down. Like how you define your teams, you might also have to define the EUC usage and people who use them. Once you identify the results, you might want to just go back, give a recommendation to your management. Give them a recommendation plan, and it's the key aspect of this is a continuous monitoring, right? So depending on how critical is this, you might want to define how often you test an EUC. Do it in 3 months, do it 6 months, at least annually, but a critical ones, at least 3 or 6 months is suggested. So how often do you go back and test them? How often you go back and check the mitigating controls are in place. So when you have to do that, all your other controls will have to fall in place. Your policy, your documentation, the ownership, the definition, everything has to be put in place. Only then the management can actually go ahead and do a continuous monitoring. I'm actually going to just take a break to quickly recollect what we have spoken about. The topic is a very huge one, but what we have tried to do today is understand what an EUC is, what are the kind of risk that we are looking at. It can actually cause losses, financial losses, and reputational risk to the organization. So it is very important that we audit the end user computing applications in our organization. How do you audit it? You basically define critical EUCs, build an inventory, identify the critical ones, you define a risk profile, and then you go ahead and test the controls in place for it. Once you identify the deficiencies, you go ahead and prepare a report and you recommend the remediation action for the business. That's pretty much on how do we audit EUCs. I know we need to kind of give a little bit of time to address your questions. So I'm quickly going to run through a couple of slides on the data governance. Now, what is a data governance, right? We spoke about the governance controls and about senior management having adequate governance. Data governance is something that we do in every process. It's a collection of practices, the best practices and processes which help to ensure the formal management of data assets within the organization. So someone is there on the top sitting and watching that everything is working fine. Why isn't EUC important for data governance? Not going to read through that basically, but if you can see on the slide, protecting the enterprise data resource from loss, destruction, threat. So IT and data security plays a very important role. And today we live in a world where AI has emerged. We talk about the data analysis, data tools, and machine learning. There's so much that we do with an Excel file and data, right? AI is all about end user computing applications. So you're playing with data every day. So you will have to make sure your EUC environment is not vulnerable to any of the risk that it talks about. It's legal, compliant with corporate policy. You define a policy, so your EUC environment, just like any other IT, your physical securities, your logical securities, your data security, just like any other environment that we talk about, the control environment, EUC has to be legal and compliant to your policies. Data vendors, I'm not really going to talk about that, but if you're using a lot of third-party vendors, you might want to be a little more vigilant about it. Governing the type of data sets on your personal devices, you kind of have smartphones. Everybody can access their emails and data on your phones every day, right? So you will have to also look at how do you ensure governance in those circumstances. Applying standards to EUC data, 3 character, 2 characters. So basically this talks about your underlying data. How do you apply the standards? So it's very important you define. So your documentation control basically helps in all this. You have to define everything in your documentation. Bigger question, will the spreadsheets ever go away? I don't think so. I know, I mean, everybody in the audience might actually say that it makes my job so much easier. Why am I going to let go of a spreadsheet? So we talk, even in spite of talking about so many risks and so many horror stories, if I'm going to ask you a question, are you going to stop using spreadsheets today? Your answer will be no. I will certainly not stop using it. So when we know it's not going to go away, it's very important for us to go back, review, assess, and implement all the required controls in place and make sure that you protect your data, you protect your organization from any kind of risk that is arising from EUC. So pretty much I've covered what I'm supposed to do in today's training. So let's just go ahead and okay, I may not be able to take a lot of questions, but I'll see if I can cover. Okay, I'm just going to stop this and expand this. Okay, there are some questions. Controlled Excel files may create too much of rigidity. Yeah, I can kind of understand this. So there is a question which says controlled Excel file can create too much of rigidity. So the way I would probably address this question is how do you define your materiality and criticality? I think that is what is important, right? So you should be able to identify what is it, the reason why you're using this EUC, a particular document. Once you decide that, then you say, okay, where do I need to put controls around it, right? Some basic controls, I think it is not very difficult. It's not going to make your process rigid. You can just have encryption controls and all that. It's not going to have any kind of what I see as, these are the best controls in place. So I don't think it's going to make your job tough or difficult when you have these kind of controls. But yes, if you want to define it, you should have a proper criteria to define the criticality and then put those controls in place. Just because it's tough, difficult to work in a rigid environment, you cannot compromise on your data or the confidentiality or the risk that we are talking about. Financial laws about like running in millions is like too much for an organization to bear, right? So that's something you might want to. How this flexibility can be ensured? So it talks about the flexibility of EUC controls. So as I answered, it is all about how you define it. Why are you using it? The very first question you want to ask yourself is, why am I using this? Is it only to save time? It doesn't really affect any of your key business decisions? Then it's okay. If it's only cost and time, then you can understand. But if you're using this for a lot of your business decisions, critical decisions, then I'm sorry, then you will have to have controls in place, right? Imagine if you're sharing a data with your senior management and they are going to take like very big decisions based on the data that is appearing on the tool. And this is very important that you get it accurate. It has to be complete. It has to be accurate. So it's very important to maintain that flexibility. Third-party risk. There is a question on third-party risk. So when I talk about third-party risk, I'm sure pretty much like when we talk about the SOC controls, right? If you're aware of the SOC 2 IT testing that we do, if you're dealing with a third party, either you ensure there are sufficient controls in their place, right? If you're outsourcing any kind of data. So what do we normally do is, one, we ensure we put sufficient controls in place in our organization, or we go ahead and ask the third party to give us a certification to say that the controls are working fine in their organization. So if you're dealing with a third party, you might want to sit and talk with them and also put it on your agreement. Your contract is very important. Confidentiality clause is certainly one of the key clause that is there in most of the contract. So you cover whatever risk you're talking about, you make sure that is covered in your contract agreement and that is not compromised. So that is another question I have. I know there are a lot of feedbacks in questions. Someone is talking about covering this in ISO 27000 and other audits. See, ideally it is not under scope. That is the reason why I said it's hidden between IT and business. So it's not like mandatorily in the scope of any of your IT testing or ISO 27001. No, it is not under scope. So as an organization, you will have to take a call to make sure that you test this once in a while and make sure you're compliant to that. So if you're going for Sarbanes-Oxley, if you're doing a Basel, then yes, it might come under scope. But if you're a smaller organization, 100, 200 organization, then you might want to take a call to do it yourself. So your internal audit can do the testing. Or as a business, you can do a self-testing once or twice in a year. So that is my thoughts. So I think the question was, if you're already certified, are you still at risk? Yes, the answer is yes. So even if you're SOC certified, you're still at risk, because none of these covers the end user computing as a key control. So you might want to take this as a separate item on your risk management or an internal audit function and do a testing at least once or twice. So I know we are running out of time. You've just logged in out of your busy schedule. What I can suggest is you have the information. You can just write to info@riskpro.in. You can just go ahead and drop a note. Any questions, anything you have, we can certainly take it offline. we can also do a detailed discussion. We also perform reviews around this, so you can also approach Risk Pro if you want any kind of services. But drop us a note, and we promise that we will certainly get back to you. So I hope this was informative. I know it's too much to talk in this topic, but we wanted to cover this as much as possible. But we can certainly do another session if you want to do this for a group of people. We can certainly go ahead and do another session of this. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening to me today, and I hope it was helpful to you. Thank you.